What is up, fellow humans? Today we are back with a Does It Domesticate Red Headed Krait edition. So let's go ahead and see how well this snake domesticates. My guess, it's not going to have a very high score because it is highly venomous and very sensitive, but we're going to go through all the categories and give it a score regardless. So let's do this. So this is going to be the first of the new series that I'm going to be doing in this way, the Does It Domesticate series. For this, we're going to be ranking our animals on 5 different factors to determine the overall Does It Domesticate score, or DERPy score for short. And those are going to be the factors including difficulty of care, expense, rarity, potential risk, and why are you mad, or how chill is the animal. So the first thing we're going to go through is the D, or the difficulty of care. So the first thing we're going to be going through is the D for difficulty of care. Now remember, the lower the score, the worse the animal makes as a pet. Okay, so the lower the difficulty of care score, the harder it is for someone to keep that animal. Now, the Red Headed Krait is a very, very unique species, and I think it speaks for itself when I say that we only know of one individual in the United States, and that's the very snake we have in front of you today, Katy Perry. She's absolutely beautiful, and everyone probably wants one, but there are a number of reasons why that's difficult and why this animal is going to get a very low score when it comes to difficulty of care. Now, this snake is a very nocturnal animal in the wild, which already makes it a little bit annoying to care for, but not overall too much. What that means is you may have trouble feeding this snake unless it is super dark out. In fact, I sometimes feed this snake as late as 3 in the morning. So that is something to consider. Another factor that's worth considering is the feeding factor. The snake is really difficult to feed, not only because this is an ophiophagous snake, meaning it is a snake eater by nature, although they likely do eat other things in the wild as well, such as frogs, lizards, maybe even the occasional rodent, though I wouldn't be counting too heavily on them eating rodents. But they would probably be somewhat opportunistic in that regard, where they would eat other small animals, but they do predominantly seem to eat snakes. So that is another thing that makes them really, really difficult to care for, because you have to get feeder snakes for them to eat if you want to keep them alive. On top of that, they can be picky. They aren't just going to eat any snake you put in front of them. Some of them are going to be very specific when it comes to what they eat. I've heard of cases where snakes such as this, or the blue coral snake, only eat certain species native to Southeast Asia, which can be a real pain in the butt to get as feeder snakes, because you would probably have to get imported wild-caught animals to actually use as feeders, and they can come in with parasites. You got to freeze them, and maybe they don't want to eat frozen snakes. Maybe they're visual. So feeding them is just overall extremely difficult compared to pretty much every other snake out there, at least in captivity. There are some really weird species out there that have really weird feeding habits that are going to be harder than this, although this is definitely no easy snake to feed. Now, we've talked about how they're nocturnal. We've talked about how they're difficult when it comes to feeding them. Next, we're going to talk about the conditions that they need to be kept in. So these are from Southeast Asia, places like Thailand, Malaysia. The point is that area is very wet, very humid, and very, how do I say this? Very airy. They need a lot of ventilation in captivity, and they need a lot of humidity, but you can't over soak them. You need to kind of find the perfect middle ground, because they are very susceptible to getting scale rot. In fact, I've had that issue with this very snake a couple of times. Just the beginning stages, little, individual ventral scales starting to get that little bit of scale rot. Nothing worse than you would find on an average wild-caught animal. So I didn't get too worried about it. We got some betadine. We took care of the issue. The snake now is in really good shape. Obviously, she's doing really well. She's beautiful. She just finished shedding, so she should be super pretty right now. We're actually going to feed her probably in a day or two before I head out to Costa Rica, because I'm going to Costa Rica this weekend, believe it or not. But that's aside from the point. The point is, these need very specific conditions. You need high humidity, not super high, like highly wet and damp, and you need high ventilation, another thing that people seem to struggle for. Another species that people seem to struggle with that needs kind of similar conditions is the Wagler's pit viper. People get them a lot because they're super pretty, super beautiful snakes. They've got, you know, bright yellows and blacks and whitish blues and all kinds of beautiful colors on them, but they don't do well in captivity. They need, like I said, high humidity, high ventilation, but you can't over soak them, you can't overfeed them. Very finicky snakes, just like this one. Overall, this is a very difficult snake to keep in captivity, hence why there is only one. So we need to come up with a score that reflects the difficulty of keeping this snake. Now, I don't think it's fair to give it a 1 because there are snakes that are more difficult. In fact, one of the next snakes up on my list that I would really like to work with is the blue coral snake, which is a very similarly looking snake to this snake, except they're even more difficult to keep, more sensitive, more picky when it comes to feeding. So I don't think we can give this snake a 2. Honestly, I stress out about keeping the snake alive, but I haven't had as much difficulty keeping her alive as I expected when I first got her. Honestly, I thought she would have died within a couple months. I thought I was burning money when I got this beautiful snake. I just wanted to keep her just for the experience and just to give it a shot. I've now had her alive for 16, 17 months now, and she's been doing well for me, so I definitely can't complain. But all in all, let's go ahead and lock in a score of around a 2.5. We're gonna give it a 2.5 when it comes to difficulty of care. Short intermission here to talk about something I think is important. So, as many of you know, I was in the military for about 6 years. Everyone around me was either smoking or vaping, but now luckily, flavored air is becoming a leading, healthier alternative, and at the forefront of it all is Fume. Fume is a flavored air device designed to make people move away from vaping. There's no nicotine, no vapor, just flavor. Fume is an award-winning flavored air device that delivers great taste without any of the harmful chemicals. Fume is a great alternative to other bad habits. In fact, it's designed specifically to help you break those bad habits. Over 500,000 people have already added Fume to their daily routine, and it makes perfect sense. It doesn't come with the same downsides as smoking or vaping. It also has all these different flavors for you to try out. And right now, if you order the Journey Pack using my code JOEYJ, you'll get a free Fume topper. So if you've been thinking about trying to break your bad habits, this is definitely a good first step. Make sure to go to tryfume.com/JoeyJ or scan the QR code on your screen right now to get things started. And next up, we're going to talk about the expenses when it comes to keeping this snake. So as you can see, they get kind of big. She's probably around that 5.5 foot range. I've seen pictures of them over 6 feet before, 6.5, you know, right at that 2 meter range. I've seen them right in that area. So they can get quite big. So you need a larger enclosure, at least a 4 foot enclosure. At least a 4 foot enclosure. If you could do 6, that'd be even better. Right now, she's in a 4 foot enclosure, which I'm kind of going back and forth on whether or not to upgrade her. She's doing well in it, so I don't really want to risk moving her to a new setup, but I'd like to give her more space. So we'll see, but at least a 4 foot enclosure for this species for sure. On top of that, we've talked about the humidity needs and the ventilation needs. So my personal recommendation is one of these vision cages. In fact, that's what I keep her in. These 4 foot units have a very large vent on the top back portion of it that pretty much covers the entirety of the enclosure, just about probably a good 80% of the enclosure, maybe even more. So a very large vent. And on top of that, I actually drilled ventilation holes into the sides of the enclosure as well, just for extra ventilation on top of that. And of course, she is on top of the stack to maximize the amount of ventilation that she gets. So you will need a somewhat large custom enclosure to keep this snake alive. If we go vision, it is a high quality enclosure. It is also reflective in the price. It's an expensive enclosure, but it does what it needs to do. So that's expensive in its own right. Not to mention on top of that, keeping the snake alive requires feeding it like we talked about. Snakes as feeders are probably the most expensive feeders you can get for another snake. So if you're feeding your snakes, it's gonna cost money. That's a hefty recurring cost. If you feed this snake once every 2 weeks, let's say, you give it a nice solid meal once every 2 weeks to keep it alive and healthy. And sometimes I feed her as much as every week. It just depends on what I'm feeding her. Then you're gonna be paying probably, if you get lucky, you can get feeders for 10 bucks, but as much as 20. So we'll average it out at $15 times twice a month, 30 bucks a month times 12 is 360 bucks on average per year just in feeders for this snake, on top of a nice, somewhat expensive enclosure. Plus, you need moss and stuff to keep it humid in there. And obviously you need to, I would recommend making it somewhat naturalistic so they actually, survive in there. I would think that plays a role with a sensitive species like this. All in all, it's probably going to cost you around, around $1,000 just to get up what I would consider a really good setup for this snake. It would probably cost about $1,000 up front, and then obviously, as I said, maybe another 30 to 50 per month on top of that. So not a cheap animal by any means. But we also have to take into account the cost of obtaining a snake like this. You cannot get them, so they're going to be pretty expensive. You're probably going to have to import them yourself, and they're very sensitive, so they could die on import. So you have to include a pretty hefty cost on top of that. So all in all, let's say getting your hands on one of these snakes costs you around a couple $1,000s, including initial setup. That's assuming you can get your hands on one of these animals. So somewhat expensive, I would say, somewhat expensive towards the higher end echelon of snakes to keep in the reptile hobby. So we're gonna give it probably around I don't like 2.5 though. I don't like that. Let's make it an even 3. Let's make it an even 3 because lower numbers means it's more difficult. I don't know where I was going with that. So 2.5 for difficulty of care and 3.0 for expense. Next up, we're going to talk about the rarity, which we alluded to when we were talking about the expense. Rarity. This is a rare animal. This is a really rare animal. It is hard to get your hands on, okay, for a number of reasons. But as we've said multiple times now, she's the only one that we know of in the country. It's possible there are others out there. I'm not going to say with 100% certainty that there aren't, because there could be. But as far as we know, she's the only one. Which means obtaining another one is going to be excessively difficult. As of now, no one's importing them, which means if you want to obtain one of these snakes, you're going to have to get your import license yourself, probably, or go through a broker that has an import license to get one. So what that means is getting your import license, contacting someone in Southeast Asia that can hook you up with these animals, someone that has the proper paperwork to export animals from Indonesia or Thailand or wherever you're getting these animals, probably Indo. You're going to have to find someone over there, have them collect one wild caught, because this is a snake that you cannot find captive bred. I don't know if anyone's ever bred these in captivity before. I wouldn't be surprised if no one has. You cannot find these captive bred anywhere, guaranteed. So you're going to have to get one wild caught, imported out of probably Indonesia. So you're going to have to get that all done. You're going to have to pay the person in Indonesia to go collect it, to export it to you. And you're probably going to have to get multiple, because these are very sensitive snakes. They might die in transit. So that's another thing you have to keep in mind. You're probably going to have to get a lowest quantity anyways, because you're probably going to only be able to do business if you hit a certain monetary threshold with them. They're not going to send you one individual snake. It just doesn't make sense from a monetary standpoint. So obtaining one of these is going to be very, very difficult. I would say about as difficult as it can get. Not quite there, because I got one, but just about as difficult as it can get to get a snake. We're going to go ahead and make this nice and easy. This is a very difficult snake to get. You're going to probably have to do it yourself. So we're going to make it easy. We're going to give it a solid 1.5. A 1.5 when it comes to rarity for this snake. Now we're going to talk about the potential risk factor. What that means is we're going to be talking about on the worst day, how dangerous is this animal to deal with. So what that takes into account is the venom toxicity and how hard they are to handle, not how willing they are to bite. Just those first two, just the venom toxicity and how difficult they can be to handle. The venom toxicity of this animal is very high, meaning it has a low LD50 value. LD50 is what we use to measure venom toxicity. What that means is the lowest given quantity of venom required to kill 50% of the sample animal, generally rodents. The snake with the lowest LD50 value is the inland taipan at, I believe, 0.025, which is a really low score. They're going to be around 1/10 of that, which is still really, really toxic. This is a snake that can kill you very easily. Kraits kill thousands upon thousands of people every year. I believe the estimation is around 10,000 people per year in India alone, probably more throughout Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand. Kraits are highly venomous. They're an elapid, same family as the cobras, taipans, mambas, things like that. Highly venomous. So the snake is highly venomous. And now, how hard are they to handle on their worst day? They are generally calm. Normally they would get a really good score when it comes to being calm, which we're going to talk about later. But on their worst day, kraits can be incredibly twitchy and spastic animals. They usually are not. In fact, she has almost never done that. She's twitched on me a couple times, but she's usually very chill. But we're talking worst day scenario. They can be very twitchy when they want to be, and that makes it very difficult to handle them, on top of them being highly toxic. Now, they're not as agile or athletic or fast as a mamba or a boomslang or a taipan, but they're very twitchy. So the venom on itself is going to put them probably in that 2 to 3.0 range for a score. Add in the twitchiness, we're probably going to give this snake a really low score. The potential risk on this snake, let's give it a solid 2.5. I'm going to give it a 2.5, not lower, because I feel like it doesn't deserve to be lower. With mambas, taipans, boomslangs, brown snakes, there's a lot of stuff that's still going to be worse to deal with on their worst day than this snake. So we're going to give it a 2.5 as the score. The last factor we have to talk about is the why are you mad? Also known as how chill is this snake? And this snake is very chill. Believe it or not, for a venomous snake, this is probably my most chill and easy to deal with on a regular basis snake that I have. Now, like I said, on their worst day, they can be twitchy and annoying to deal with. She doesn't really have worst days around me, which is good. She's very chill, very easy to handle. Honestly, if I had to free handle one of my venomous snakes, I'd probably choose her. She's very easy to work with. She's large, which gives me, the space to work with her without getting my hand super close to her head. Very relaxed snake. We're gonna make this quick, easy, and simple. This is gonna get a high score when it comes to the chill factor. She's gonna get an 8.0 when it comes to the chill factor, an 8.0, because she has twitched on me a couple times. 8.0 overall on the chill factor for the Red Headed Krait. Very chill snake. Don't want to meet it on its worst day scenario where it's twitching around at night and stuff. Very chill snake though. 8.0 score for the chill factor. So the overall derpy score for this snake was a 17.5 out of 50, which when averaged comes out to around a 3.5 out of 10. A 3.5 derpy score is really low, meaning you probably should not try to domesticate this snake. I would recommend sticking to something easier. Well guys, I hope you all enjoyed today's video about Kraity Perry. It's been a long time in the making, so I'm glad we were finally able to go ahead and get it finished up for you guys. Also, huge shout out to Fume, today's sponsor. If you haven't already checked them out, make sure you go ahead and do that. Until next time, I'll see you all later. Take care.